It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I reflect back at my time at BYU probably 30, 40 years ago now, it seems. It seems like forever ago. 30 years ago, no, I'm not that old. I love this class where you get an opportunity, a chance to hear people that had kind of have gone through life, gone through some of the decisions that you have up in front of you, and I always enjoyed kind of hearing about their companies and what they did and who they are and what are the challenges that they may have had over time. So, as Steve had mentioned, my wife Courtney and I live in Richmond, Virginia. We've got 4 kids. My daughter Kelsey and her husband Logan and our newest granddaughter Finley live in Seattle. Chase, our oldest son, who was the one that Steve, Dr. Little was mentioning, being an information systems graduate, lives in Virginia now. Bo, who's here with us, is a computer science student here at BYU, and my youngest son Connor is on a mission in England. And one of the things that's what's great about BYU is it's given us an opportunity to kind of watch our kids go and follow in our footsteps as we went to BYU and some of the opportunities and blessings that came from that. As Steve had mentioned, EnterBridge is the company that I founded currently, and EnterBridge provides data solutions to a number of B2B companies. We've had a chance to work with a variety of them across multiple continents, and we'll talk a little bit later about this in my presentation today. We have offices we're headquartered out of Richmond, Virginia, but we've got offices in Florida and South Carolina, in Ohio, Maryland, and even here in Provo. So we actually had 10 folks working for us last fall on a project that we had out of our Provo office, which was great. We're involved with a number of other companies that we've been affiliated through investment or acquisition or the other, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a little bit as well. I figured that maybe the best thing I could do for you is kind of to share my journey as an entrepreneur and kind of give you a flavor for what my life was like, and we'll see if that applies to some of the things that you're thinking about as you go along. I always found that was more interesting than understanding data analytics. There may be many in here that probably love data analytics, but we'll save that for another day. So my journey actually started in State College, Pennsylvania. My father was a college professor, much like Dr. Little. He was an engineer, civil engineer, and I was born in Connecticut, and then we moved to State College where he was getting his doctorate. And on the weekends, he would take us down to the engineering school, my brother and I. He'd take us down to the engineering school, and back in those days, he had access to the IBM mainframe. And so what he did, because he was a faculty member, he got accounts. And back in the 70s, which would be the time that I was there, getting time on a mainframe was very precious, frankly. A lot of people paid a lot of money for that. But my dad needed something for us to do, so he started by giving us the little IBM punch card, this thing here, which most of you probably never ever seen. And you can actually program with this, and you'd build your code, and you'd feed it into a deck, and you'd feed it into the machine, and it would do a lot of cool things. And my dad gave us a deck that would print out a maze, and gave us other things. And then as time evolved, as we continued on, as he left the Penn State after he got his doctorate, and we went to New Mexico, which is where I grew up. And in New Mexico, that pattern continued. And so as I got into my teenage years, I started to love going into the computer lab and playing around with the computer and seeing what you could do. By then, we'd evolved to CRTs, so you could actually, either that or a stream of paper that would ream through. I mean, it's amazing the technology that you have today that we take for granted. Back then, that wasn't the case. So during my teenage years, I had a number of interesting experiences. So first thing, this pickup truck is, if it was painted green, it'd be the perfect color. When I was 17 in high school, I decided that before that I had bussed tables. I'd worked at the local fast food restaurant. I'd gone and helped out in a variety of different ways, and I decided that, hey, I wanted to start a lawn business, right? So I got a lawnmower, and I got my truck, And I went out summer of my junior year, and I went and got 30 or 40 customers. And what I realized was before that I was making $3 an hour. That was the minimum wage back in those days. $3 an hour, which means on a good month, if you could get a full-time thing, you may be able to make, maybe $900, $1,000 total. Well, I was making like $3,500. By the second year, by the time I ended my senior year, I had actually hired a couple of my buddies to come help, and we had grown the business a little bit, which I thought was pretty awesome. And I realized it gave me time to go and golf and do a bunch of other fun things. Anyway, so I realized back when I was 17 that there was something unique about having your own business. And I realized that while, it may have been a little risky, if you're willing to hustle, you can do a lot of great things. And anyway, the long story of that is by the time I left for BYU, I realized, hey, I needed to get rid of this business. And I found a high school teacher that he couldn't make enough money teaching high school, so he did lawns on the side to kind of supplement. So I sold my 60 customers to him for a whopping $2,000. It was a great exit for me. At the time, it seemed like a ton of money, but anyway, it was a great experience. About this time in high school as well, my father decided that he was going to leave the University of New Mexico, where he was an engineering professor. In those days, college professors didn't get paid as much as Dr. Little gets paid now, right, Steve? That's a joke. You are in the business school, where all the money is. That is true. My dad got 1 day a week when he could do research, or he could do consulting, or doing whatever. And he realized, and we had 4 in my family. I was the oldest of 4, and he realized that early on that in that 1 day a week he was making 2 to 3 times the amount of money he made in his salary. And I was getting ready to go to college, and my brother would follow, and my 2 sisters after that, and he realized that it was difficult. It was difficult. And frankly, he was really enjoying his private consulting business that he had set up. So he decided to leave my senior year of high school, which is a challenging thing for a family to go through when you leave the security of a tenured faculty position at a major university to go out on your own, not knowing whether there will be folks that will hire you or not. Well, my father's now 82. He just retired last year. So he's been actively engaged through this whole entire process. But his leaving the university gave me insight into kind of that risk-reward quotient, which was big. My dad was, this is my dad and my mom. They were always huge on education. I've already told you, my father got his doctorate in engineering from Penn State University, got a master's from Yale, and graduated, unfortunately, from the University of Utah, which is where he met my mother. But everybody's got a black sheep in the family. I guess my family is that. So anyway, my mom raised us as kids, and when my youngest sister left town to go off to school, she decided she wanted to go back to get her doctorate. And the joke we say in our family is my mother was always the smartest in the family. But Dad had the doctorate degree, and by the time my youngest sister left, anyway, my mom did a PhD in organizational behavior, and her dissertation was literally on wisdom. So she traveled the world, interviewing people that were wise, wrote a book on it, and anyway, she's the wisest person I know. So as a result of my parents' focus on education, it became imperative. It was kind of one of those requirements of the Bleyl family that you're going to get an advanced degree. So after I graduated, I met my beautiful wife and got married here. I was at BYU and then went to graduate school. I knew I was going to go to graduate school. The year before I went to graduate school, or I decided to go to graduate school, I did a summer internship at a power company, Virginia Power at the time, which is Dominion Resources now. I think they're nationwide. And they put me in the data storage division. And there, my job was to move data from these tape drives to this mass storage device, which sounds pretty heinous, and it really was. It's what inspired me to go to graduate school. So I left, and I got into the University of Virginia. For those of you that don't know what the University of Virginia is, that's the place that Thomas Jefferson founded. in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it's a beautiful place, beautiful country out there. And it was there that we started having our kids. And shortly after I entered the master's degree program, Courtney got pregnant with my daughter, Kelsey. And halfway through that process, I realized, wait a minute, I need a job. because when you've got bills to pay and everything else, we were starving students or whatnot. Courtney had really provided for us up until that point, and so I was kind of faced with a dilemma. What do I do? So I ended up working for a small company in Charlottesville, Virginia, called Commonwealth Clinical Systems, and they gave me a unique project to build what was called the Patient Reference System. It was a clinical preventative care application for primary care physicians, which was fantastic at the time, a great opportunity. They put me in charge of this project, and which was exactly what I was looking for. In addition, it gave me time to finish my master's degree, so I finished up my master's degree at UVA and loved the process, loved small college towns, much like Provo. There's something unique about a place like Provo or Charlottesville. And I continued to work there afterwards. But I always had this itch, this itch that was started, maybe back in high school when I had my own business, to do something on my own, because I realized the potential. And frankly, I enjoyed the freedom that running your own business was. So I created, while I was at the University of Virginia, right before I'd started with Commonwealth Clinical Systems, I started a company called Resume Data Systems. And back in those days, there wasn't any Adobe Acrobat. You didn't have an Adobe reader where you could take your resume and put it in a nice PDF that everybody could see. You literally had to print out your resume. And so what I did, working with the placement office at the University of Virginia, we developed a program where students could enter the key information that employers wanted to see, and then we mailed out these floppy diskettes to potential employers, and they could literally search for this database that was on this floppy disk. So anyway, Resume Data Systems died when I went to Commonwealth Clinical Systems, but it was another opportunity to kind of get that exposure. After UVA, went to work for after Commonwealth Clinical Systems, I went to work for a venture-backed startup called Health Communication Services. This group was spun out of Anthem, what's now Anthem, which is a big health insurer, and their goal was to build a community health information network. And this is back in the early 90s, so probably, what's that, almost 25 years ago or so. And even today, the interchange of healthcare information is really nascent. A lot of what we've come to realize is hospitals and physicians and insurers and employers really view that information as their proprietary value, right? You go back to your physician because they already know everything about you. They've got your history. They don't have to do 50 million tests to you if you go to a new physician. Well, back then, our goal was to create this network so that all these organizations could communicate. And it was a fantastic opportunity. They threw $25, $30 million at this project over a couple of years and quickly realized that none of the players in the ecosystem would participate. But anyway, so they broke that up. And before leaving, I had an opportunity to jump back into consulting work, much like my father had done, and started making some really good money. I mean, most of you probably know, consulting pays a lot of money. And that was right about the time that I was approached by my former boss from Health Communication Services, and he approached me and he said, look, Eric, I've got these two friends, these serial entrepreneurs. They're looking for a computer guy that understands software development, can help them as they launch their third venture in this wireless data and wireless communications business. So back in the late 90s, email was really just in academics. Really, it wasn't prevalent. You had AOL that was just coming out, and what we were trying to do was provide email on your hip, all right, with the ability to do some unified messaging, which means I can direct your phone messages as well as everything else from this single device. So that was the vision that we set out with at Locus One, and that was the that was a great opportunity for me. So I was hired as the CTO to kind of manage the technology that was there. And initially that started out to be, I did everything. I mean, it was, if one of the sales guys' laptops didn't work, that's what I did. I went and fixed it. I was the demo guy, right? So I'd go on sales calls and I would be the demo to demonstrate how the service worked. We worked with one of the Verizon companies, a company called Bell South at the time, and they had this packet data network. So if you think about the cellular technology you enjoy today, back in those days, it was so antiquated that we had this packet data. It wasn't even a TCP/IP communication stack. So you had all these unique proprietary protocols that we had to manage to communicate a message between a server and a mobile device. So it was some pretty cool stuff. Back in those days, Research in Motion, the guys that built the BlackBerry, the thing on the bottom there, were just getting started. The first BlackBerry, which we were a partner with RIM, and the first BlackBerry was literally about this big, and you put it on your hip, and it was pretty awesome. So, exactly. So halfway through, so going through the process, one other story about Locust One. When I interviewed, I found one thing that was really interesting about employment, and I don't know if you'll value this or not. I found it was really important, especially on the East Coast, to let people know that I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints anytime I interviewed, right? Usually coming with BYU on the resume, that usually brought out the question, are you Mormon or not? But for some reason, my future boss, these two serial entrepreneurs, didn't ask. And so I felt it important to say, Bill, I need you to know I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and as a result, there's certain things that I will and won't do, right? So I don't drink, and integrity is important to me, and the other. And Bill said something to me at the time, who's my boss, the CEO of Locust One. He said something to me that I've tried to relay in settings like this. What he asked me was, he said, Eric, I know two kinds of Mormons. There's one is the most upright, honest, perfect person you'll ever meet. He said the other one is the exact opposite. And so what we need to figure out is which one are you? And so I kept that in mind, and I think about that a lot. What kind of member am I? What kind of reflection am I of the Savior? Am I doing those things that I need to do? And that became a critical piece. And as we went along at Locust One, that became a key part of who I was and what the company became, which was kind of cool. So this is 1996. I've got, trying to think, my youngest son was born in 1998, right? So I've got three really tiny kids. And for the first 3 years of this startup, I spent 4 months a year on the road. The company was based in Jacksonville, Florida, with an office up in Richmond, Virginia, which is where I lived. We lived in Richmond because my wife's family was there, and it was easy for her to get the support she needed while I was traveling. And I'd evolved from fixing laptops for the salespeople to building the tech behind the scenes, the software that ran the business on the other. And as things evolved, I was in demand. It was great. I loved every minute of it. I hired a tech staff to work with me on the projects that we got, and things were good. The challenge was, and we did things on the cheap. What my serial entrepreneur co-founders taught me was, spend the money like it's your own. Even if we had raised $2 million from previous investors, so we doubled up at the microtel. Is there anybody in here that knows what a microtel is? It's like a La Quinta, but like 5 times worse. It's really cheap. Anyway, so about this time, so it was probably 1999. I had a fateful, I came home from a trip, and I could tell Courtney, my wife, was perplexed, and she was upset. Anyway, she hauled me out into the driveway, and and she basically told me something's got to change. She says, you've got to be here. You missed Bo's recital at his preschool, and I need more. And what I'd forgotten that the family was really the most important thing. It's the reason why I put them up at the beginning of my presentation. It's the most important thing to me, and it's what gives me the most joy. So even though I was having a great time in the startup world, it was important that things needed to change. Now, throughout this, and I love to golf, I love to go out hiking, those kind of things. Throughout the whole startup thing, I'd given up those things already. But what I realized was I needed to start to make an effort to try to arrange my schedule such that I'd be home for my family as it was. So my 5-day trips became 2-day trips. If I was having a hard time getting home and they wouldn't fly into Richmond that night, I'd fly to DC and drive down, just so I'd be home with my kids in the next morning. It became important to me. So in 2000, actually in February of 2000, which is marked kind of by that line on the graph of the NASDAQ, that's the time we sold. So we sold to a company out of Baltimore, Maryland called Aether Systems. Aether was a first mover in wireless data. Aether had gone public in I think in the fall of 1999. They raised a couple $100 million, and they were in the process of doing a secondary, which meant they were going to go out to the public market and raise a couple $1 billion was their plan. And we were a key piece of the puzzle in making that all work. We became, so this was a slide from the roadshow that they went out with to raise the money. We ended up being this transportation and supply management group. So we were the second acquisition that they had made. They provided anything wireless. So we did wireless trading, wireless healthcare, field service, anything related to that. Aether wanted to run through, because back in those days, you didn't have there was no internet connection to a mobile device. You had all these disparate packet data networks that you had to run across, and Aether had provided a data center to aggregate that, as well as the technology to do the on-ramp there, and they viewed this as the future, which it is. If you look at the devices that you carry today, they're all an outshoot of this kind of technology. Now, Aether took this message and took it to the market and raised $1.4 billion 3 months after we were purchased. And on paper, Aether was worth $8 billion with revenues of about 20 million, which is crazy, which is part of the reason why, you see this big jump. This was the dot-com bust of 2000, which you may have heard of. Many of you probably were just very tiny at the time that all happened, so this probably doesn't ring a bell to you. But for those of us that went through it, it was an interesting time, because you saw companies getting unreal valuations on the way up, and then when the bottom fell out, that became part of it. So, and that was the case with Aether Systems. The difference between Aether and a lot of the dot-com companies is they were funded. So we had $1.4 billion, which we spent like it was 1999. So we were spending like it was in the pre-dot-com boom. So we were buying companies left and right. And our division was kind of the boring one. I was the transportation logistics, which meant I dealt with people with trucks and parcels and whatnot. We bought a company called Motion that had this little dome that you put on top of a semi-truck that lets you know where your truck's at, and you can message with it, and it tells you what's going on with the engine in the cab, and is the driver speeding, is he hard braking, all those kind of things are part of this setup. And we dealt with kind of moving freight, supply chain, kind of boring things. What we had done at Aether Systems, we'd started out, and this is probably another good message that I should have mentioned. We started out thinking wireless data, wireless email, and the other. What we realized was there was no market for it. And that's probably the case with most of the folks you hear come and talk. You originally start out with a great idea, and it ultimately doesn't pan out. So we had to do a pivot. And I remember I was with our president driving back from Office Depot. We had gone down to Office Depot in Florida, which is down in near Boca Raton, Florida. And I was driving back up with our CEO on the drive, and he said, "Eric, I think we're going to have to give the two founders that I founded with," he says, "we're thinking about basically shutting Locust One down and giving back whatever we have left of the investment money back to the investors, because the original thesis that we had built the business on didn't hold." And on that trip, I remember telling him, "Look, I think we can do this. We just have to pivot toward tracking the last mile of deliveries, which is what Office Depot wanted us to do. And we went on and built a product that did that for Office Depot and the federal government and Cardinal Health and Staples and others. And it became what we interested Aether Systems when they bought us. So my role after the acquisition was I got to run the division. So the two founders left, and I was left to kind of run the division, and I was trained to kind of run things, tight and make sure we're providing value to our customers and that there was actually profit in what we did and all those kind of things. And I remember a fateful day when I got a call from one of the senior executives at Aether Systems, and he told me flat out, he said, Erik, I took out a lot of the swear words in here, Erik, I bought you, you didn't buy me. So you're going to do it my way, not your way. And they were still trying, at this point, our stock had pulled back from $8 billion. It was now about 3 or 4. And they believed that we were, one deal or one thing away from going back up to that $8 billion valuation. Nowadays, if you look for Aether stock, it doesn't exist. Aether Systems really basically has disintegrated. They've sold it off and everything's gone. And it was about this time when I got this call from George that I realized it was time to consider retirement. Kicking back, saying, all right, I've worked hard. You can see this is what my family looked like back in those days. I actually had hair on my head. It's good. It was good. I'd always assumed, now I'm 36, we were 35, 36 when we sold. And I always assumed my golf game was terrible because I wasn't a scratch golfer, and my college roommate played for BYU, so he used to rub it in my face all the time about what a terrible golfer I was, and I figured it was only because I never had a chance to practice. So I spent 6 months trying to work on my golf game. I can guarantee you practice isn't the problem. I think there's some fundamental problems with my golf game. We bought a house at the Outer Banks in North Carolina, which is a beach in a beautiful beach. If you ever get a chance to go, it's great. And kind of enjoyed things. And the joke I tell is, the real reason why I decided retirement wasn't in it for me is I ended up having a lot of time that I could do chores around the house. And I was available to do things. And I realized, wait a minute, all my friends are still working. I'm 36 years old. I'm too young to quit. And so about 2002, 2003, Aether Systems was getting ready to shut down the Richmond office. They decided that, hey, we're going to have to do some consolidation. By then, the stock was down to about 500 million, and they realized, hey, we got to consolidate. They only had like $200 or $300 million in the bank left, so they couldn't withstand the infrastructure that they had built. And a lot of the people that I had recruited were coming free. And one of the best experiences, I should have mentioned this earlier, one of the best experiences we had in the sale was the opportunity to deliver on the promises to the employees that I had hired. So one of the things that what you're going to have to do if you go out and try to convince people to believe in your dream is you've got to convince them to believe in your dream. And ultimately, that dream to me was, hey, come along with us. We're going to do something great, and you're going to get a piece of it. So our policy at Locust One was everybody, all those key employees, became an equity holder in the company. One of those gentlemen was a gentleman named Jeff Hodge. Jeff had $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of debt. He had a car payment he couldn't make. His life was a mess. But he was a brilliant engineer, and Jeff helped us solve a lot of problems with some of the applications that we delivered. And at the time we sold, I remember going in. The best part of the sale actually wasn't the money that I received, even though that was great. The best part of it was being able to look those employees eye to eye and say, hey, this is what your faith means. Jeff, all your debt's paid for. You've got some money in the bank so you can send your kids to college. And that was great. I loved that. So when the opportunity came to bring that band back together, I was all about it. And so I went out looking. I contacted some former colleagues and said, hey, do you have a project? I've got some great people. I'd love to keep them engaged. And that's how EnterBridge got started. Shortly after that, we ran into a company called Advanta. Advanta was in the business of providing pricing data analytics for wholesale distributors. Well, wholesale distributors are the people we've been working with, the Office Depots and the Cardinal Healths, the McKessons and those guys. And they had built a technology that really provided pricing optimization. And as I talked to the founder of Advanta, it became apparent that we could really work better as a team. So in 2004, we acquired Advanta and set out on the vision of starting this data analytics pitch. And with the beautiful thing about data and data analytics, especially in the pricing worlds, in the mobile and wireless world, I would offer 5-year ROIs, right? Office Depot, their system costs like $15 million to equip 800 trucks, and we told them in 5 years we can save enough money to pay for this thing, but you'll have all these other benefits as well. With pricing, we can give you a 10-time return first year in value. So just the value and the power of analytics is amazing. And you're starting to see that with big data and the things that are coming around. If you're not involved in data and data analytics, you need to get there. 2007, we got involved and provided all the tech for a company called MDSI. MDSI ultimately provided a physician preference item, which is a hospital term for what physicians like to use, what products they like to use when they do surgery on you. And these items usually cost a ton of money. And so this company did analysis on that and could help hospitals understand what their spend was looking like. And so we provided all the tech to them, and they exited in 2007, 2008 to a company called MedAssets, which is out of Colorado, which is great. One of the bad things about these presentations is you hear all the good stuff. Well, visual spend was the bad stuff. Because we'd worked with these distributors, we realized of the margins that were in dental supplies. So dental supply margins, they supply the same thing that the hospitals get, the gauze and all those kind of products, right? Similar products, maybe a little different, but the margins for an Owens & Minor or a Cardinal Health in the hospital market is like 1 or 2%. Matter of fact, often they sell below invoice. And the only way that's possible is if the manufacturer gives them a rebate back on what they sell. Those same products were being sold in the dental industry for 40 and 50% margin. And we realized, wouldn't this be great if I could show the dentists all the money they could save just by exposing what the market prices were. And we built this cool system, which we called Visual Spend, and what it did is it went in, you as the physician authorized it to go pull your pricing, and then we went and looked at all the other suppliers online to see what were their prices. And we figured out we could save 20 to 30% of the supply cost for a dentist, which was great. But the problem with it was that the person that controls the dental spend is the office manager within the office. So anyway, that product never saw the light of day because it didn't solve a real market need. And anyway, so not all entrepreneurial stuff is successful. Answers Now is a startup we got involved with. They do autism. They're basically providing an autistic service for parents of autistic kids, and we provided the early tech for them to help them get funded and the other. And then just recently, this last year, we got into healthcare analytics with a company called New Health Analytics, which does physician profiling and a few other things. Along the way, I guess, one of the key things I think for me that's important, in 2010, I got an opportunity to be part of the Rollins Founders Group, the Rollins Center Founders Group, and it's been a wonderful organization. It's given me an opportunity to meet with folks like you, have a chance to talk about your business ideas and share a little bit of wisdom. One thing I'll tell you, especially when you get old, the older you get, the more you love sharing advice. So my kids don't listen anymore, so I'm always looking for somebody that can help do that. Also in Richmond, I helped start an accelerator called Lighthouse Labs. Lighthouse Labs is very similar to the Founders Launchpad, but in Virginia. In Virginia, they offer a $20,000 non-dilutive grant to folks that participate in their accelerator. And if any of you are interested in coming to the East Coast into Richmond and are looking for an opportunity, it's somebody you should look up to, look at, because I think they may provide some great value. And it gives me an opportunity to give back to the local community that helped me And working with BYU helps me give back to this wonderful institution as well. All right, so some key learnings, and then we'll wrap up. One of the things I've realized along the way is that rewarding endeavors are never easy, and they're often never fun. If you think back in your life of those events that mattered the most, whether that's the birth of a child, if any of you are that phase, that's hard. Just ask my wife, your wife. But there's nothing more rewarding in life than in your children. And missions, school's not hard. It's hard. You got assignments to do. I still wake up with night sweats worrying about the test I missed. The other component that goes with this is sacrifice as an eternal principle. I think one of the things we're taught is that it's important that we know how we sacrifice, and I think this is a principle that applies in business as well as it does in our temporal and spiritual lives. Integrity is everything. Much as my discussion with my founder at Locus One, integrity is all you have. Ultimately, who you are is reflected by what you do and how you act. And it's important that you realize that everybody is looking at you, and they'll measure you and your future based on how you act. So keep that in mind. Every business plan is wrong, just as Visual Spend or even Locus One in its original idea, those ideas were wrong. The important thing was to look for the opportunity where the market is, and along with that, who often matters more than what you pursue. Investors tend to fund groups that have experience, groups that have a good passion. I mean, if you ask fellow investors, the people that invest in things, they often invest in the person more than the idea, knowing that the person will be committed to make it work because they know there's going to be a problem. See the one above, every business plan's wrong. They want to know that you have the determination to go forward, and that's critical. Pigs usually get slaughtered. One of the things that when we sold to Aether Systems, this was in the .com area. The company that had been acquired before us was acquired for all stock, and they were acquired for about the equivalent of $1 billion. We sold for a fraction of that, but we insisted on all cash. We said, this valuation is crazy. It doesn't make sense, but if you were to offer us in cash, we'll do that. Well, as it turned out, ultimately, the company that sold before us was never able to exercise their stock because the stock had come down. It was restricted, and they couldn't. By the time they could get out, the stock had fallen, to the 10th of what it was worth at the time. And I think in life, there's plenty of opportunity for all of us, but if we're greedy, it usually doesn't work. Finally, I think it's important for each of you as you go forward that you pay it forward. And it's important that you give back in some fashion. We come here to learn and we go forth to serve. It's a great motto that BYU has. And I think that's imperative as you kind of go through life. So these are my thoughts. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I do have, we got 5 minutes? Okay, I brought a couple T-shirts, a little lovely BYU logo and a nice EnterBridge and unlocking the value of data on the back. Anyway, if any of you are interested, if you come to the Q&A afterwards, we'll give them out to those that come here. I've got a few.
Okay, let's thank Erik. We have Domino's Pizza upstairs in 710, so come on